Hello, everyone, and welcome to this edition of Hometown Salutes. I'm Sam Harvey, sitting in for Sherry Kendall, and our guest here this month, my good friend Jeff Hauser, Chief Warrant Officer 5, retired Craig J. Hauser, and welcome back home.
Thank you. But as you know, if you saw me on the street and called Craig, I would never even hear you.
I didn't know that was your name until I saw it on your uniform in about 1978. You're a hometown guy. You graduated from Connersville High School in 1968, and we became friends about that time.
I think we were friends with that. Before that, you were good friends with Dan Sizemore, and so was I.
And Sam Hankins.
Sam Hankins.
Out on West 7th Street, my friends, the Fleetwoods, lived across the street from you.
That's exactly right.
And that, I remember us being out there, Jeff, and you came to us, I think Gene and George and myself, I don't know who else might have been there, and you told us you were going to go take a physical and you were going to join the Army and fly helicopters. And at that time...
If I made it through flight school.
If you made it through flight. But that was your goal.
That was the goal.
At that time, as it is now, our country was divided. And it was divided over the war. And people our age, you were a couple years older than I am, but that was a big concern of young men of that time in the late 60s and early 70s.
Yes.
So why? Why the Army and why aviation?
Well, my dad was a professional pilot. We had moved here from Greenfield when he was hired to be a pipeline patrol pilot, and they wanted him, instead of Greenfield, they wanted him at Connersville because they had a much nicer airport, hard stand runway, lights. Anyway, that's why we came here. I was probably in the 3rd grade, went to Old Maplewood, and anyway, that's why we came. So when I was sitting there looking at the draft, I did not do well in high school. Many years later, I did well in college. I did not do well in high school. I knew that, the draft was right there, and I didn't have any deferments. I wasn't really looking for a deferment, and I figured, well, I was working at Ford, but with no seniority, we were laid off most of the time.
More than you worked.
Yeah, more than we worked. And so I worked various different jobs for the year after graduating in '68. And by '69, I decided, this isn't going anywhere. I'm going to get drafted, and then if I get drafted, I won't have any choice. And so that's what determined. I thought I would try to be a pilot like my dad, although I was hoping for fixed wing, and the Army needed helicopter pilots.
And a lot of them.
So I went to rotary wing flight school after basic training. At that time, you went to basic training, and then you went to the warrant officer flight program as a candidate. Today, you go through the warrant officer school today, then you go to flight school as a warrant officer, as an officer. But we went as candidates. So that was 5 months in Fort Walters, Texas. And if you made it through, then you went to advanced flight training in Fort Rucker, Alabama for another 4 months. And I made it.
When you went to just Army basic training,
Fort Polk, Louisiana.
Did they, because they knew that you wanted to be a warrant officer candidate, did they make it any harder on you?
They didn't seem to make it harder on us because of that, and it turned out once I was there, I found that there were a lot of other people that were earmarked for warrant officer candidate school, flight school. What did make it harder is Fort Polk was the home of Army infantry, and at North Fort they had AIT, Tigerland, and it just turned out that although almost all of the basic training companies were in South Fort, I was at North Fort. And the company commander of my basic training company was a Special Forces captain that was just back from Vietnam. And apparently he thought that we were all going to be infantry, apparently. So he treated us more like we were AIT than we were basic trainees.
Mm-hmm.
But made it through that, hated Fort Polk. At that point, I hated the Army, I hated Louisiana. I just, I couldn't see far enough ahead to think, okay, I got to make it through this so that I can go on with my training. This is not the way the Army's going to be for me the next several years. I got to get through this.
But in some ways, maybe, and we'll talk about that later, maybe that training you got there at Fort Polk helped you later in what you found in Vietnam and
I don't know.
Cambodia, as far as you making your way out of the jungle.
It may be.
I don't know.
There was some very, basic survival instruction, but not like you would get if you went on to infantry AIT.
Okay.
So.
But having gone through basic training, those overs, the drill sergeants, they had to be tough on us, especially knowing that at any time we could be put into a war situation.
And, I talk about in my book that Senior Drill Sergeant Dutra, that guy couldn't have been, I don't know, my height, maybe 120 pounds soaking wet, and he was excellent. You could tell that his point of view was, I'm going to do everything I can to help you because I know where you're going, And whereas some of the others, but Senior Drill Sergeant Dutra really did care about our training. And whatever he pounded us with was to help us. I really believe that.
So then you go to flight school. Talk about your experience at flight school. And by the way, Jeff has written a book, Apache Country, a Cambodian Odyssey, and you can get this book on Amazon. And I would recommend. I couldn't put it down, so we'll talk about the book a little more later. But
it's also on BarnesandNoble.com, not off their shelf, but
okay.
Yeah.
So. You make it through basic and you make it to flight school.
So we go back to we go home on leave. Apparently the classes were stacked up at Fort Walters, Texas. That's in northwest Texas. So they sent us home on leave, but you have to come back to Fort Polk. And then they sent us by charter buses from Fort Polk to Fort Walters, Texas, which is out west of. It's out in the Mineral Wells area, west of Fort Worth. Beautiful country, beautiful. Nice people out there. Anyway, so you're going to be out there for 5 months, and the first month is you don't touch a helicopter. When you first get there, you're in a snowbird company, which means we're just getting ready to send you up on the hill. We're going to send you up on the hill when one of the companies becomes open and ready for you. So in snowbirds, we did a lot of physical training and stuff like that. Then when we went up on the hill, the first month of supposedly flight school, you don't touch a helicopter. It's all classroom. And then the next 4 months is taking you from, this is a helicopter, getting you soloed, if you make it that far. Getting you soloed, and then you spent a total of 5 months at Fort Walters. And if you made it through there, then you went on to Fort Rucker, Alabama for advanced flight training. Instruments, transition into the Huey, some gun training. And I made it. I wondered when we first got there, because in the first couple of weeks there were a series of mid-airs, and I thought, my God, I hope this is just, this is not normal, I hope, I called my mom back here in Connorsville and said, I didn't know if this would get out to the national news or not, but we've had a series of accidents here, and I just wanted to make sure that you knew that if somehow you did hear about it, I'm okay, I'm fine, So at any rate, Yeah, there were a whole series of those. And then there were guys who flunked out. And then there were guys that were kicked out. Before we got out of Snowbirds, apparently the TAC officers, apparently their job was to weed out as many people as possible before they spent any money on us.
Mm-hmm.
So whereas I thought I was coming from basic training, where you got screamed at all the time, and now we'll be warrant officer candidates and we'll be treated. Oh no, that's not. No,
Still.
No. No, we were still screamed at all the time. We were paid E5 pay, but we had no rank.
Mm-hmm.
And the E5, I think, was to make up for the extra expense of all the uniforms and the sewing and stuff that we had to have. But no, we were still screamed at all the time. And before we left Snowbirds, we were in old World War II barracks. And before we left Snowbirds to go up on the hill and do our warrant officer candidate company, they had gotten rid of 2 barracks full of people.
Mm. They hold a lot of people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
If they're double bunked, especially.
you know, the old World War II, upstairs, downstairs.
Like we stayed in at Camp Atterbury.
Exactly.
And other places.
Exactly. Bunk beds, just like you said. So altogether, the people that quit and the people that got kicked out made up 2 full barracks full of people before we ever got to look at a helicopter, you know. People just said, I'm tired of being yelled at. I'm tired of being screamed at. I don't need this, you know. Of course, you weren't out of the Army. You were just out of the program.
And where you were going may not have been as good as where you were.
You never knew.
No.
One of my friends ended up as an MP in Korea.
Mm-hmm. But it's not for everyone.
It's not for everyone.
So you graduate from flight school and get shipped to Vietnam right away?
30-day leave to come back home.
Mm-hmm.
See my friends.
Mm-hmm. Cruise Kunkles, do all the things that we
Cruise
do.
Kunkles. Got to cruise Kunkles. See Sam and Danny and those guys. You know, visit with my folks were divorced by then. They'd been divorced for several years. My mom was a secretary in the maintenance office at Ford. So visit with her, see my friends. My grandmother and some other relation lived in Richmond, so, you know, visit with them. And as you know, the 30 days went very quickly, and then I was off for Vietnam. So
you get to Vietnam and talk about the aircraft. You flew a Loach.
Yeah.
Which I don't know.
It's pronounced Loach. It's L-O-H, Low Observation Helicopter.
I don't know if I ever saw one. We had
You've seen pictures of them.
I've seen pictures, but I mean, when I was in over Shelbyville, we had OH-58s and Hueys, and that's
we never
what
had
worked on.
OH-6s over there.
Right.
Now, I was there a couple of times at night for AFTPs at Shelbyville when what they now call the Little Birds, which is the newer version of the OH-6, they would fly all the way up from Fort Campbell, Kentucky, part of Task Force 160. They fly all the way up from Fort Campbell, Kentucky, land at Shelbyville and refuel, no lights, nothing, sit on the other end of the parking area, didn't want anybody around their aircraft, but they wanted us to refuel them, and of course our people did, you know, your Army, you know.
Sure.
But they had come all the way from Fort Campbell under goggles, under NVG, no lights on the aircraft.
Wow.
And we were just getting into goggles, yeah. But at any rate, that's the newer version of what was the OH-6 that was produced by Hughes. Today's version that they call the Little Bird is drastically different from my OH-6. But yeah, it's low observation helicopter, but it's pronounced Loach. It's a scout bird.
Which you had to transition into. And,
I did.
And learn to fly that. And you basically flew those treetop level with Hueys above you and gunships above you, then Hueys above
always
that.
a gunship, but we didn't use a command and control bird Some other units did that, but we didn't use the command and control bird of Huey until we went in Cambodia. So I always was with a Cobra, and he was a couple thousand feet above me. Like you said, I'm on the trees, I'm on the treetops. He's a couple thousand feet above me in a big circle, watching me. But when we went in Cambodia, we were assigned a command and control Huey, and he was at another couple of thousand feet up above the Cobra, pretty much running the mission from his point of view up there. When I got to Vietnam, I was sent to the CAV, First Air CAV, and the CAV then sent me to the 1st Squadron of the 9th Cavalry, and they sent me to A Troop, or Alpha Troop, which over there was called Apache Troop.
And you were Apache 1 too?
I was Apache 1 too, and as soon as I got to Squadron, I was there with another classmate that I hadn't seen since flight school, and a couple of other brand new warrants. And the first thing the XO of the squadron said was, "Welcome to Vietnam, welcome to the CAV. We really need scout pilots. Who wants to volunteer?" And we're all like,
Always told don't volunteer for anything.
So 3 of the 4 of us did volunteer for scouts. But since it was going to be an in-country transition for me, I just had to get actual official flight instruction from an OH-6 instructor pilot, and we only had one in the troop, and he was busy from time to time, so we'd get another guy from another troop, and so it took me, I don't know how many weeks to actually officially get the transition. But when I first got there, I was flying as a brand new guy co-pilot in Hueys, so I did a lot of Huey assault missions with the lift platoon. And then I would fly with the scout platoon as a trainee observer. We didn't have 2 pilots in a Loach unless you were training somebody. So I sat where the observer sat and learned the job and learned what to look for. And the pilot would let me fly sometimes on the way to the mission or on the way back from the mission at altitude. But on the mission itself, you just watch what I do and learn from what we do, okay? But the good news was I flew with, in the time it took to get the transition, I flew with every scout pilot we had, every crew we had, every aircraft we had. So I learned something from every one of these guys, and most of these guys were really good, really good.
So let's fast forward a little bit. There was missions into Cambodia, and we weren't supposed to be there, or we weren't going to be there on the ground anyway.
Exactly. Because Nixon had gotten so much flack from the spring offensive in Cambodia in 1970. That was May and June. And he got so much flack from that touched off riots across the country, worst of which was the Kent State, at Kent State, Ohio. So when we went back into Cambodia in early 71, you're exactly right. No one's supposed to be on the ground. So this was really dumb for us because we flew from my base at Song Bay up to the border at a place called Loc Ninh, rubber plantation just this side of the border. Our Hueys would fly it was CAVs, so we had our own internal infantry platoon. And they were good, really good. Our guys would fly them up to Loc Ninh every day. Our guys would spend the day in the shade of the rubber trees playing cards or sleeping or whatever. And when we lost an aircraft, we had to rely on the Browns, which were the South Vietnamese ARVN soldiers. They loaded up on our Hueys, and they went into Cambodia so that they would be the ones on the ground when they got inserted. We weren't allowed to have any Americans on the ground. So what Nixon and his administration was telling the American people was that we have no American ground soldiers in Vietnam. And reporters were saying, and journalists were saying, well, we're hearing about this big invasion again. We have no American soldiers on the ground in Vietnam. Well, technically
they didn't, even though you were just a few feet off the ground.
And
But-
all the aviation was American. Everything was American aviation.
And probably for good reason.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, when you were over there, you got taken down.
Yeah, I did.
Talk about that a little bit. I know that has to be tough on your mind at times.
We were told by our squadron commander, Colonel Putnam, no relation to Major General Putnam, the division commander. He came to Song Bay, and we had a big formation outside, which we never did because of the heat. All those formations we had inside the building at Shelbyville, or sometimes outside.
Keep the troops out of the sun.
So that was unusual, but the purpose of his visit was to ask us to support a 3 to 5 day incursion into Cambodia. He wanted as much as possible, 100% participation from our troops and from our aircraft, and then in 3 to 5 days it'll be over. We'll be done. So, like he's asking us, so it's,
right. Yes, sir.
of course we can do that, Well, I was, let me think, 2 or 3 weeks into it when I got hit. We'd already had several aircraft hit. And I went down on the 10th of March, 71, well inside Cambodia. At the time, I turned it in as a rocket-propelled grenade once I was debriefed by Army Intel, once I got out of this thing. And I said RPG because I'd been fired at by those before. And but I now believe that it was heat-seeking. When we were in the Guard together at Shelbyville, I as a safety officer, read a bunch of after-action stuff, and it turned out that heat-seeking was coming down into that area when we were there. So the distance, I heard him fire it, and I looked out the right door and saw a little poof of smoke in the distance. That's too far. I mean, it could have been a lucky shot, but I now believe it was heat-seeking. So that knocked me out of the sky
Could
right
not
away.
rotate down because
No,
I
had no cyclic control. I was coming up on a river, and we were on fire. My door gunner, Curtis Smoot, was right behind me on my side, and Robert Kaiser was in the left seat next to me. And I looked back at the instrument panel. Of course, every light looks like a Christmas tree, lights everywhere, caution lights, warning lights. And I knew we had no engine, and I saw a river coming up, and so what I was going to attempt to do was turn down the river, flare, and set it in the water. But I had no cyclic control. So we're just here for the ride now. So I went over the river, crashed into the trees in the riverbank on the opposite side of the river, exploded. We're already on fire. Exploded. Aircraft fell and sank into the river, and then we were on the bottom of the river. So, and this is all happening in nanoseconds. So my mind is still back at, did they just shoot at me? And now I'm on the bottom of the river, So, and as you know, I never saw my door gunner, my crew chief again. It is believed that Curtis Smoot, my door gunner, got out of the aircraft or was blown out of the aircraft. He either got blown out of it or he jumped when we were over the river, because his boot prints were later found on the riverbank in a different location from my boot prints. And the American boots, as you know, were very different from the boot prints of the North Vietnamese, and they were everywhere. Those boot prints were everywhere. But they found 2 different sets of American boot prints. So my belief is that somehow I got away and he was probably captured and killed immediately. There was no reason to keep us over there. We didn't, we weren't at any high level of intelligence on what the military was doing or anything.
You were underwater for a pretty good period of time.
It seemed like a long time.
Trying to hold your breath, but you made it to the surface.
I did. I got out of my harness, got out of my helmet, got out of what was left of an aircraft. We never had doors on loaches anyway, mainly because your mission was, you had to be able to see. Plus it's very hot. We didn't have any air conditioning. The Cobras did, but the Hueys and the Loaches did not. And the third reason is if you went down in water, you'd never get that door open, you know. So,
Right.
So I came out of what I thought was what was left of a doorway, and I made it up to the surface.
So you had to survive through the jungle.
4 days.
4 days. We're going to run out of time here, but I want to talk a little bit about that. Crawling through the jungle, having to looking for water.
Yeah.
And talk about
this is the
what
dry
you found.
season. This is the dry season now, and besides the river that I crashed in, all of the little intermittent streams and those creeks and things, they're all dried up. So I constantly looked in those, looking for water. My throat was burned. I was burned. I was blind in the left eye. I was almost blind in the right eye. But water was the biggest concern, trying to find water, and that's what I struggled with most of those 4 days.
And when you found it, it was slimy and
Oh yeah, it was just it was like it reminded you of like a tire track in an area. You know, you'd find a little bit in the very bottom of a creek bed. You'd find just a little bit of this stagnant water covered with crud, covered with water spiders, and I would scoop that away and then drink as much of it as I could possibly hold. I didn't have a canteen or anything.
Yeah, I even stored some in your boot and walked
Carried
with
it in a boot one day.
Walked on the jungle floor with no boot on.
With no boot on.
So you were MIA for 4 days?
Mm-hmm. 4 days.
And you saw some Vietnamese coming down the road in a Jeep?
Well, I heard one night, what I was sure were people walking, at least 3 of them. And of course it's very dark in the jungle, and so I just stayed as quiet as I possibly could, and I would hear them walk and stop, and then walk and stop, just like my dad and I used to hunt in Indiana woods.
Mm-hmm.
That was one night. Yeah, the last day, though, I saw a couple of Cambodians. I finally made it to the road that I was trying to find for 4 days. This is called Highway 13, at least it was in Vietnam. But what is a highway over there is a bad-shaped county road in Indiana, you know.
Mm-hmm.
At any rate, I saw a couple of Cambodians with bicycles, and I took one of their bicycles.
Yes.
And then I rode until I heard a vehicle coming down the road, and I hid in the bushes, and it turned out to be a Jeep that was painted like an American Jeep. I painted like a Vietnamese Jeep. Mm-hmm. And the soldier inside was dressed in a Vietnamese uniform, but I didn't trust anybody in this area. So he dropped somebody off. He came back down the road, and when he came back down the road, I jumped out of the bushes off of a little hill into the back of the Jeep and commandeered the Jeep.
And all you had was your service
38
pistol.
Yeah, Smith & Wesson.
And you found your way best you could. You had a small compass that was
Had a compass.
Kind of like you would get in a Cracker Jack box.
That's exactly what when I first got that, I thought, man, I wonder if this really works, you know, and I fastened it on my shoulder holster. And anything that was actually fastened on my body, I was able to get out with. But all my survival equipment, everything is on the bottom of the river.
So you get to civilization, basically. I mean, there's people. It's not civilization, but you get back with some friendly people.
Well, I had flown over the headquarters of the South Vietnamese division that we were supporting with our aviation. They were in a bunker complex at a rubber plantation at a place called Snoel. Yeah, this gets really confusing for people that were never in the military. We Americans are in Cambodia supporting the South Vietnamese, ARVNs, in Cambodia who are fighting the North Vietnamese communists that have come all the way down the Ho Chi Minh Trail through Laos into Cambodia and down like that. They had gone into Laos to avoid the DMZ, and then come on down like that. And then they were infiltrating into Vietnam, South Vietnam from Cambodia. So anyway, so this is a South Vietnamese ARVN unit, and I had flown over this every day. I'd seen it from the air every day, but of course I'd never been on the ground there, never walked to it or anything. So it's good that I found the guy in the Jeep, because that bunker complex was a good mile off the side of the road. If I had still been on the bicycle, I probably would have just ridden the bicycle past snow, wouldn't even know it was there. Eventually made it to Vietnam probably, but yeah. So anyway, yeah. So I got into this. He was actually ARVN. He took me to the compound, and from there I used their radios to contact my people, to tell them to come pick me up. The Vietnamese colonel did all that. I found out later from my friends that they had gotten a call to pick up a VIP at the landing pad at Snow. And they didn't like to land there because every time they landed there, they got mortared. So, okay, we got to pick up a VIP, you know. So anyway, so of course they didn't know, the colonel didn't tell them that we have the American pilot that has been lost the last several days, you know. Didn't tell them that. So, yeah, so they came in, they picked me up, flew back to Vietnam, took me to the med station, and wasn't much they could do about my burns. I was burned on my wrist, and my whole face was burned, and the doc there got me hooked up with someone to check my eyes out down in Saigon. The following day or so, they took me down there to have my eyes looked at.
Do you have any lasting effects from that with your eyes? Because
really
reading the book, it's a wonder you could see anything.
I know it. I believe that it was broken blood vessels that blocked this eye entirely, and a cut or a scratch on the lens on this eye. So I spent the whole 4 days looking through the bottom of this eye.
At that little compass.
At that little compass. Yeah, and needless to say, if they had not gone back to normal and 20/20 vision, I could have never flown in the Guard with you. You know, I mean, I couldn't have gotten back into.
That's right. That's right.
You know, I mean, the Army understands that, you know, the day's going to come when you're going to need these.
Right.
But I was still young enough that, you know, I wasn't wearing glasses or anything, and but the eyes, they came back. Actually, I had my vision back before I left Vietnam.
So they made arrangements for you to call your mother.
Yes.
And after you'd talked to her, she gets a call or that you're MIA. And she says, no, he's not. Or
she gets a staff car from Fort Benjamin Harrison, Indianapolis, pulls up in the driveway, and 2 Army officers knock on the door.
Mother's worst nightmare.
Exactly. If you remember that piece from Saving Private Ryan, do you remember that? Where the car pulls up in the driveway? Yeah, it almost, yeah. So she's like blank, you know, and they said, you know, Mrs. Hauser, yada, 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 you're the mother of Warrant Officer Craig J. Hauser, you know. Yeah. Well, we're here to tell you that he was shot down and he was missing in action. He's okay now, but he was missing in action. She said, can't be you got the wrong guy. I just talked to him. The chaplain got me a Class A phone call after I was taken back to the med station. Chaplain got me a Class A phone call to call back to the States. And, you know, in a few seconds being on the phone with her, it was obvious she didn't know anything about this. So I just...
You didn't tell her what you'd been through the last 4 or 5 days?
I'd called her from the USO once before in Saigon, and I'd called her from somewhere else when I had the opportunity. But Class A phones were hard to come by. But anyway, once she said, well, how'd you happen to call? And I said, well, I just, you know, I was able to use a Class A phone, so I just thought I'd call while I had the opportunity. Well, okay, good, you know, we talked a few minutes. And then it was sometime after that the staff car shows up, and she says, you got the wrong guy. I talked to him. Yes, we know you did, but I don't know why he didn't tell you about that, but we have the right person. And she's just shocked, you know. Same thing with my dad. He was living at New Paris, Ohio, and there's a real nice quarry over there we used to scuba dive in and fish. And staff car came from Wright-Patterson Air Force Base with 2 Air Force officers. They'd gone to his apartment, and he wasn't there, and his wife told him where he was fishing, and they went over to the quarry and they found him. Same deal. My son, one of those.
Right. Huh. It's the story, the book, once again, Apache Country, Cambodian Odyssey. I encourage you to buy it, read it. It's terrifically written.
Thank you.
You pay honor to your 2 crew members that were lost, and I know that that weighs heavy on you. To this day, but it's just part of war that we don't like.
And the other thing, you mentioned the in memoriam page. I also listed in the back a long list of friends of mine that died over there. Mm-hmm. And I also listed a page of our friends at Shelbyville, guys that we worked with that were excellent, that were excellent pilots. I didn't know them in Vietnam, but you saw there's a whole list of them that we flew with in the Guard at Shelbyville that were excellent pilots.
This isn't meant to put anyone down, but having flown with a lot of those guys and having flown with guys that had never been in combat, it was night and day.
There's a little bit of difference.
Riding with them, yeah.
A little bit of difference.
A little bit of difference, and that's, I don't mean that as put down.
No, I know, understand.
Because they went through some tough training to even be able to grab a hold of that cyclic.
I understand.
Back to...
And we also had, at Shelbyville, I guess that's one of the reasons my crew was so important to me at Shelbyville. We had, how Shelbyville was. We had excellent crew chiefs and maintenance people. Excellent. And when they're sitting in the back with me, I flew Hueys for 24 years at Shelbyville. When they're sitting in the back with me, it's important to me what they think. Now, whether that's because of Vietnam, but that guy in the back isn't just an enlisted crew chief. He's a member of this crew. Right. And if he thinks there's an issue with something or something's not quite right, I want to know about it. We're going to share that information. This isn't, I'm the pilot, I'm the boss. It's not like that.
All the years of my years over there, we would go to annual training, and we would have many times a regular Army evaluator with us. We always got top evaluations that said that they would fly with us, and our aircraft were better maintained, and it was the men and women that you and I worked around over there.
Yeah. When we went to JRTC, and you retired before that, but when we went to JRTC, I believe that was 2000. All units throughout the Army go to one of 2 different training areas, one of 2 different JRTCs. One is Louisiana, Fort Polk, and the other one's out California, I think. But at any rate, we raised the bar at JRTC. Here was this, this task force Falcon made up of National Guardsmen from, Indiana, Illinois, different states. They're used to having units of regular Army. We raised the bar. We just, they never seen anything like that. But look at the experience in our Guard unit.
Right. Years and years of experience. And I always said we did more in 2 days a month than our counterparts maybe did in 28 days a month. But once again, not putting anybody down.
Not putting anybody down.
But we were professionals. I do want to back up a little bit. After you came out of the jungle and got back with U.S. troops, you came down with malaria.
Yeah. Week later,
and that had to be from drinking that water and mosquitoes, and because you were ate up with mosquitoes and bug bites.
And they were even embedded in the burns. Where I tried to get them away from me, but they. It was impossible to fight with them. You just had to let them, I was not taking the malaria pills like I was supposed to. no one that I knew was taking the malaria pills.
Almost makes it worse than the malaria. Huh?
Everybody over there had diarrhea, and we were supposed to take a white pill every day, and on Mondays we took a big red, kind of a reddish-orange pill. And most of us were not taking those because it made the diarrhea that you already had even much worse. So we had to sign a paper swearing that we were taking them,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and I didn't know anybody that was taking it. So probably because I wasn't taking it. But yeah, I came down with malaria. My platoon leader had given me, you know, he said, we won't even talk about you flying until, you know, this is in the med station when they flew me back to Vietnam. He says, we won't even talk about work until, you know, I'll give you a week. You know, you lay around, get some sleep, you know, eat, and we'll talk about it in a week. Well, in a week I was down with malaria. Mm-hmm. So then I was gone for probably 2 months altogether. By the time I went to Saigon, to the 3rd Field Hospital at Saigon for 10 or 11 days, and then they flew me up to Cam Bay to the convalescence center up there at Cam, and I was there for another several weeks. And then I've had 2 relapses of malaria back in the States. When I was teaching at high school at Rushville. Late 70s, came down with a relapse. And every once in a while, I feel like, this might be the flu. But
Just don't know,
yeah.
So you get out of the Army then, take a break, and you go to college and become a teacher. And end up in Rushville, and we like you anyway. You know that.
Can you believe that?
And you and I have had a lot of fun seeing each other at football games.
At football games, yeah.
But what made you decide to go into education?
My first wife I met when I was stationed at Fort Knox after I came back from overseas. She had graduated with some girlfriends, and they all wanted to stay together as much as they could, and the schools on Fort Knox were willing to hire all 3 of them. So that's what they did. So she was teaching at a school on Fort Knox when I met her, and we ended up marrying shortly after I got out of the Army. She had been to college. I'd known several friends in flight school that had gone to college. Honestly, the people that I ran around with in high school, those guys weren't going to college. You know, they were going to the factory.
Right.
They were going to the farm. And I had friends that were going to college, but I just didn't think that was right for me, and I'd done so poorly in high school that, you know, I just didn't see, you know. But guess what? When I went to college, I was older.
Maturity level and what you've been through.
I had been around a little bit. So I started at Ball State, and Ball State accepted me on probation. They were on quarters at that time. And that being on probation lasted just that 1 quarter. And then they saw that I was getting all A's.
Yeah.
With a B every once in a while.
Right.
And so I went through 4 years of college at Ball State in 3 years, going year-round, and graduated with honors. And as a social studies teacher, I was looking for a job, and it seemed to everyone that social studies teachers were a dime a dozen. I had had Harry Smith in Connersville High School, and geez, he was just great. He was just great.
Yes.
And I think he probably would have been shocked to find out that I did so. I did run into him. He was a friend of a teacher friend of mine at Rushville. They were both involved in Historical Society. And so he found out later that I had graduated from college. He knew that I had been a pilot in the Army. He had read about being shot down and all that, so he knew about that. And then he found out that I had gone to college and graduated from college and was teaching at Rushville High School. But isn't that ironic?
Yeah.
I would end up down the road at Rushville.
Yeah. Yeah, but that's great. I mean, you're still close to home and the familiarity.
And I never, ever painted the Rushville Lions.
like some of our friends did.
Well, yeah, I won't mention that there was plenty in Connersville to paint. So
yeah. Well, let's fast forward then. 1978, you still had the desire to fly, and I'm standing on the drill floor at the Armory in Shelbyville, there along I-74, and here comes Jeff Hauser in.
Surprise,
and gives me a
surprise.
handshake and a hug, and we were really glad to see each other, and we had a lot of good times in the Aviation Brigade in Shelbyville.
We did. Just excellent people over there. You know, I know that in the middle of the 60s, the Guard was being bashed by regular Army people, you know, calling us weekend warriors and that kind of thing. But that's not the Guard that we were in.
No. I would say when Ronald Reagan became president, we got serious. We used to call it, we go to summer camp. We went to annual training about that time. And today they're professional warfighters. They are good. And
well, let me tell you, and this is a good example. When you remember when Grenada happened? And I had some friends that were in the Marines that were going into Lebanon at the same time. So I believe this would be 83, I think. Reagan would have been president. Those Black Hawks that were flown into Grenada for that mission, the aircraft commanders, the average flight hours for the aircraft commanders of those Black Hawks was 200 hours. 200 hours.
yeah,
And they're aircraft commanders.
yeah.
You know what the average flight hour level at Shelbyville was?
Tell me.
Oh, it was several thousand.
In the thousands, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
You know, Bobby Nash had 2 tours in Vietnam. You know, just.
And they, the ones that came after us went on and fought in the Middle East and
Exactly.
with great valor, and I salute them.
Exactly right.
But it was that tradition, that heritage that from back when we were in the 70s and later that.
I want to believe that a lot of that's true. A lot of our friends ended up going to Afghanistan, Iraq, and several of those have told me that their basic understanding of what's going on and how to do this is because they flew with so many veterans in the Guard at Shelbyville, you know?
Right, and we can be very proud of those men and
Exactly
those men
right.
and women.
Exactly, and women. That's exactly
yes,
right.
Yes. Jeff, I think we're going to wrap up. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
It's always a pleasure to see you. And once again, the book, Apache Country, a Cambodian Odyssey by CW5, Craig J. Hauser, retired. We all know him as Jeff. I urge you to buy the book and read it. We talked a lot about it, but once you pick it up, you won't be able to put it down. Jeff, thanks
Thank you
so
very
much, my friend.
Thank you
Yeah.
very much.